everybody, it's Sarah, and for some reason it feels like it's been ages since I sat down and filmed, and I think it's been at least a couple of weeks since I uploaded my last video, but I am back, if you can even say that, because it wasn't like I was really gone. But anyway, today I am here to film the tag that every booktuber does around the middle of the year. In June and July, I am here to film the mid-year book Freakout tag, just to see, you know, where are we right now? The year is halfway over. How was the reading so far? And for me personally, I have to say, the reading feels pretty mediocre. I think I'm like, let me just very quickly look it up, but my average rating on Storygraph right now is 3.84, which doesn't seem that bad, to be honest. However, at least half of the 5-star reads that I have given out so far this year were rereads, and Storygraph counts those, so yeah. And I only had 3 5-star reads so far this year out of almost 60 books already. I'm at 58 books, so less than 10%, which just feels pretty bad, not gonna lie. It's like, it's not even less than 10%, it's around 5% actually, now that I'm doing the maths. Like, I have 60 books, almost 60 books, 3 5-star reads. I'm at 10% if we count the rereads, but anyway. So I have the questions open on my laptop, and let's start with the first one, the best book you've read so far in 2023, which, as I said, I had 3 5-star reads, so the choice was pretty easy, also because I am trying to not choose a book for multiple answers, and one of the 3 will be the answer for the next question. One of the 3 is a short story collection. It was The Tales of the Celestial Kingdom, which I don't really feel like that would be my favorite book of the year so far, or the best book of the year so far. And this last one, the last book that I gave 5 stars, not only as one of the favorite books that I read so far this year, although I feel like favorite book is a kind of weird title for this type of book, but I also think that not just subjectively but also objectively, this is one of the best books that I've read this year, and it's Minor Detail by Adanya Shibli. It's a very short book. First of all, it's just over 100 pages, and in this book you have 2 different narratives. The first of those, the first half of the book, is set a year after the Nakba in Palestine, in Gaza, and you follow an Israeli soldier as he kidnaps and also assaults a young Palestinian girl. And then the second narrative that you follow is of a woman living in the West Bank who comes across the story of the soldier and becomes obsessed with this, as is seen, almost minor detail in history. It's where the title comes from. And so she tries to find out as much about this detail as she can and goes on a journey through that. And this story is not fun to read, it's not easy to read, it's pretty heart-wrenching because it just, like, on all sides it's pretty tragic. Pretty tragic kind of feels like a weird way to phrase it. It's tragic, just like, period. But the way the author uses images and kind of just literary tools to tell the story is so well done, so incredible. There's these images that reoccur again and again over both narratives, and so you have, for example, like the dog barking and then the smell of oil, and there's those images coming again and again that make this, in a way, a very easy to read book. By the way, this was translated from Arabic by Elizabeth. I, for a second, my brain just froze. Elizabeth Jaquette. So that's who the translator of the story is. I think this is definitely a book that I would recommend to a lot of people. The second question is the best sequel you've read so far in 2023, and that has to be the last 5-star read so far that I've had this year, and it's Speaking Bones by Ken Liu, because I finally finished this, I think in the first 2 months or so of the year, and to be honest, I cannot remember anymore what happened in this story. Not gonna lie, aside from scenes that are just burned, or chapters that are burned into my mind, this series, like, I know roughly what it's about, but it's kind of wiped from my memory. Which, by the way, is not about the book, it's just how I read, and I'm pretty bad at remembering what stories are about. But The Speaking Bones is the 4th and final book in the Dandelion Dynasty Quartet. And that story is kind of a multi-generational story. You follow 2 main generations, and the first book starts with there being this massive empire and a rebellion being started. And you follow 2 different men who fight on the side of the rebellion and fight together, who are like fundamentally different from each other. And then just the story moves on from there, but I don't really want to say too much because like that would be very spoilery. But anyway, I love this series. I love the characters in it. There's some characters in this series that go through so much shit and just so much tragedy. Like, they deserve to be on the top of the list of the characters that go through the most, like, in fantasy ever, which is hard to accomplish because fantasy is full of characters who go through a lot of shit. But yeah, I love the characters, I love the plot, I love the nuances. This is such a great and nuanced type of story. I will trust Ken Liu to write everything that he wants. Like, if you think a situation is very clear cut, he will add a like new POV where suddenly you question your entire alliances to the different people in the story. And then he also does this really amazing thing where he like writes a lot of inventions into the story. Those inventions, like, if you know a little bit about like technological history, I guess, which I do because I work at the Museum of Science and Technologies in Vienna, so, you know, I know a lot of these technologies from like telling visitors at the museum about them. But if you know that, you will pretty much instantly recognize what is being invented right now, and it's such an interesting thing. And a lot of times when you have these big battle sequences, which I will admit, that type of writing will not be for everyone, you have these big battle sequences and then you have new invention being introduced, but you're not instantly being shown how it ends in the battle and like how it's, well, you're being shown how it's being used within the battle, but like if it ends up working perfectly as it should, etc. But instead you're being given a chapter that's kind of a flashback to the thing being invented, and then you're back in the battle and then there's a new invention being introduced, and it goes back and forth, which I guess can be jarring for some readers because the like action kind of comes to a very jarring halt. But I just really appreciated that type of storytelling. There's also a lot of philosophy in here, Eastern and Western philosophy, and just like, I really, really love this series, and I can highly recommend it to a lot of readers because it's something utterly different within the fantasy genre while still somehow feeling very familiar. Question number 3 is a new release I haven't read yet but want to, and for this one I kind of had a hard time finding anything. I mean, of course I have my list of anticipated releases, and to be honest, the ones that I really, really wanted to get to instantly, I have already read mostly, but other stuff I just like, I own them already. Like right now on my list I only found 2 new releases that are out already that I already own that I haven't read yet. So I guess I'll tell you about one of those, and that is Sunbringer by Hannah Kana, which is actually on my like more immediate TBR shelf. That's what I wanted to say. Like I have a little cube over there where I put the books that I intend to read sooner rather than later. And this is the sequel to Godkiller, which follows Kissin, whose family was killed by gods, and after that she swore revenge and she has become a god killer. So she has become someone who goes after gods and kills them. She also lives in a country where gods have basically become outlawed. And then one day, however, she comes across a young girl who seems to be bonded to a god. And she has to help that girl to do something that I forgot what it was. And then also along for the journey is the king's main right-hand guardsman, or like former right-hand guardsman. So yeah, and it's also queer, and I pretty much enjoyed the first book. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars, so it wasn't like I was in love with it, but I had a really good time with it. It was just slightly too short for me, and so I just want to continue on with the second one, especially since the ending of the first one, I think like right after I finished it, I really felt the need to want the second one, if I remember correctly. But yeah, once again, it's a case of I've forgotten a lot. But yeah, so I'm excited to see where the second book leads, especially since recently I think the title of the third book was announced that I forgot again. Number 4, most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and for that I have 2. First is Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid, which is a reimagining of Lady Macbeth from the Scottish play from Macbeth. However, I do believe that we follow her in her youth and before she meets Macbeth. And then the second one is The City in Glass, that I have absolutely no idea what it's about, but it's written by Nebo, and I think it's her first full-length high fantasy novel. So I am so excited for that, because Nebo is one of my favorite writers ever. Question number 5 is the biggest disappointment, and like there's no doubt in my mind that it's Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Tuno Dawson. There was nothing I enjoyed about this book, which is just so disappointing, especially because I really enjoyed the premise of it. Just like the premise is a little bit... First of all, Tuno Dawson is a trans author, and the premise was a little bit, what if J.K. Rowling was the villain in the story? So you follow multiple different characters who in their youth fought in this big war where it was basically witches and warlocks who believe that they are superior to mortal humans, mundane humans, and wanted to take over against witches and warlocks who are like, no, we shouldn't do that. It sucks that we are hiding pretty much and that we're not out there living openly, but let's not do that. However, by now the friends have kind of drifted apart. They're in their 30s mostly, 40s maybe. A lot of them already have almost adult children, and now there's a new prophecy about the like Leviathan and about a person who will bring the Leviathan back, that I forgot what it's called, this person. And at the same time, there's a person being found who is more powerful than any witch or warlock ever. Everyone thinks this person is a warlock because they present to the outside at the beginning of the story as a boy. However, it turns out it's actually a trans girl. So this person is a witch, and so now you have the two different camps who are like, no, this is like Satan's spawn basically, and this person has to be imprisoned because there's no way this person could actually be a witch, and then others who are like, no, it's not, it's a witch, let's everyone chill out. And so the premise, obviously the evil witch is very much a transphobe, and so the premise sounded really interesting because it sounded like it could be using a lot of you know, dog whistles by TERFs, etc., and weaving it into the story. But it just, sadly, the book fell completely flat for me. I found the writing to be pretty basic. I found there were way too many POVs. I was so uninterested in any of the characters, and it also lacked the nuance that I would want from this type of novel. So yeah, I just really didn't like my experience with this book, I have to be honest. Next, question number 6, we have biggest surprise, and I actually only just finished this yesterday, and that is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I gave 4.75 stars. Ow, I just hit myself. Now, I had read 4 Silvia Moreno Garcia books previously. The first one I read was Gods of Jade and Shadow, which I gave 5 stars. I adore that book. The other 3, one I gave 2 stars, one I gave 3 stars, and one I gave, I think, 3.5 stars, but it was like barely 3.5 stars. Basically, Mexican Gothic I really didn't like, and then Certain Dark Things as well as Velvet Was the Night, I was just like barely into it enough that I didn't stop to DNF both books. Like, they weren't bad by any means, I didn't dislike them, but there was nothing about them that was gripping to me. And The Beautiful Ones I had bought before I bought either Velvet Was the Night or Certain Dark Things. I have owned this book since 2021. So this was the book where for 3 years basically I was saying I'm not interested in reading any more Silvia Moreno Garcia. I have been burned too much. She's just like, she just doesn't seem to be the author for me. And I still own this book, however, so I still want to read it, but it will be the last book that I read by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So I went into this with like, not exactly expectations of disliking it, but like pretty average expectations. Also, it's romantic fantasy, fantasy romance, however you want to call it. So it's also not a subgenre of fantasy that I'm like usually very into. I adored this book. I love it so much. Like, I didn't give it 5 stars, but that was pretty much only because it didn't necessarily alter my brain chemistry, and also because I wasn't sure if the reason why I'm enjoying it so much is just because I went into it with such low expectations. But this is, like, I'm not even sure if I would call it fantasy romance, because yes, the romance is at the center of the story, but it feels more like the human connections and relationships are at the center of the story, and the main one just happens to be romantic. Does it make sense? I hope it makes sense. Anyway, in The Beautiful Ones we follow Nina, who is a young woman who for the first time is introduced to high society. However, she is very spirited. She's not necessarily what people would call a proper lady. She doesn't really care that much about etiquette, and also she has a telekinetic talent that she uses quite frequently, even though that is not proper for women. She also kind of becomes infatuated with this guy, Hector Auvry. And Hector is a performer. He is a master of telekinesis, and so Nina kind of convinces Hector to teach her telekinesis as well. Hector has his own reasons for getting closer or wanted to get closer to Nina, and that is Nina's cousin's wife, who is the third POV that we follow, Valerie, who was Hector's first love, who broke his heart when she married a rich guy instead of marrying Hector, who at the time was broke and also from a commoner family. And so Nina doesn't know that, and so it's about the dance between those 3 characters, kind of just moving through high society and just changing and growing, and it's just really well written. Like, the stakes are pretty low, they are very, very personal. There isn't even any big secondary stakes, like, I don't know, the family dying or whatever secondary stakes you might have in a fantasy or also non-fantasy romance. It's really just about those three characters and the solution or resolution between those three, and I adored it. Nothing else I can say. I adored the story. Then next I have favorite new author, debut, or new to me. And to be honest, for those of you who don't know, it takes me pretty long to consider an author a favorite author. The reason for that is that I think I have to read multiple works by that person, so either standalones or series, before I can consider them a new favorite author. However, there's two authors I want to talk about, let me get this from over here, that I will definitely keep my eye on. First, Rachel Gillick. I read the Shepherd King duology by her, and this duology, while I gave neither of the books 5 stars, is a 5-star duology for me because this does so many interesting things with narratives. I do have a full gush review of this, so I will leave the link down below. And then the other one is Oo Sangoyomi, who is the author of, what's it called, Masquerade, which is a historical fiction set in pre-colonial Western Africa in Yorubaland, and it, like, the setup is inspired by Hades and Persephone, the story. So you follow a young blacksmith, a young woman, who is kidnapped by the king of Yorubaland. And while this book, I will talk more about it in my wrap-up, has a lot of flaws, what she does narratively, and with a kind of, like, it's not very obvious, but with a kind of unreliable narrator as far as it comes to the main character and how she sees herself in certain aspects. Like, I wouldn't call her a full-on unreliable narrator, also because I'm kind of picky with how to use that label, but there's just, with the framing of the story and of this character and the development of this character, there's like so many interesting things there that I definitely will keep out my eye for, or like look out for more books by this author, and I truly hope she is gonna be able to publish more in the future. So yes, and Rachel Gillick, just because she seems to be one of the only authors that I've tried so far who writes romantic fantasy, fantasy romance that I actually ended up enjoying. I will just skip number 8, which is newest fictional crush, because I don't get fictional crushes anymore, and I racked my brain, I just couldn't think of anyone. So then I have newest favorite character, and for that one I probably have to pick Nama's Kiss, Moirin from the Nama trilogy, which is the 3rd trilogy within the Kushios Legacy universe. And Moirin is just such an interesting character. She is, I think a lot of people will think her uninteresting because she is already so self-assured and self-centered at the very beginning of the story, and sure, she loses some of her naivete during especially the first book and then also a bit of the second book, but her trust in people still never wavers. And yeah, I love Moirin. I find her such an interesting character. I find her such an interesting character in terms of how she interacts with the narrative and with the plot of her story, because she is the main character. She very rarely seems to be the protagonist of the story, but she more so seems to a lot of the times have the role of the almost mentor type character. So that's just very, very interesting to me. And yeah, I definitely love that. Then the next question number 10, book that made you cry, I think is the first question where I have to pick a book for the second time, because I think this book is the only one that made me cry so far this year, and it's Speaking Bones. I was bawling by the end. Like, truly bawling. Like, crying to the point where I had to, like, I think I said it in my February wrap-up. I don't remember exactly when I finished, but the last 50 pages took me as long as the 200 previous pages to get through, because I had to stop to wipe my eyes so often. So that type of ending, but yeah. Then book that made me happy, and I've just talked about it also a lot in the videos that I've filmed this year, that this year I just seem to not find a lot of books that I connect with on a like casual level. I don't have a lot of the books where I'm like, these are not necessarily books that make me think, not necessarily books where I think they are amazing, gorgeous, like no comparison, etc., where I can just enjoy them and have fun with them. A lot of those books end up disappointing me this year. However, this book did not. Also have a full review of this one, so I will leave the link down below as well. I think, yeah. I also have a review of the Nama trilogy, not yet of the Beautiful Ones, so, but the Nama trilogy I will link below as well. But the book that made me happy, After the Forest by Kel Woods. Is this the best retelling that I've ever read? No. Is it kind of silly in places? Yes. But I really, really enjoyed it, and that made me so incredibly happy. Like, I cannot tell you how happy that made me. Then number 12, most beautiful book I've bought so far this year or received. And for that, I mean, I did add a little bit to my Dorian Gray collection, but I'm not necessarily sure if any of the books that I received this year I would count as like the most beautiful so far. And my Dandelion Dynasty Midnight Edition Broken Binding books aren't here yet, so I can't count them. So I guess I'm gonna have to go with one of the Illumicrate books so far this year, and I think the prettiest one so far that I got is Goddess of the River. Like, I'm sorry. First of all, this is the outside. The color is so pretty. I don't remember what exact, I think the original one is like dark blue and orange or something. But I love this color contrast. This is the spine. Like, I'm sorry, what? And then the end pages, just gorgeous. And then underneath the dust jacket as well. Like, come on. Come on, you can't tell me this isn't absolutely gorgeous. And then for the last question, we're gonna have to, no, let's try it. Let's try and see if we can get through the battery blinking. But the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I picked out 2 books that I've owned since last year and I really need to get to because I know I love them, but that's also what kind of scares me about getting to them. But that's Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wang and The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. Yes, I do still have the self-pub version, and yeah, this is dark academia, high fantasy. This is high fantasy something. But anyway, that was it for the mid-year book Freakout tag. I hope you enjoyed this video. Tell me in the comments down below what would be your answers to the question. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month will be left linked down below, so go and check those out. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!